Hello and welcome to the SLP Ansan online training video regarding child abuse. During this video, we will be taking a look at what constitutes child abuse, the three main forms of child abuse, how to spot child abuse, and how to report child abuse. We will also be focusing on child abuse from a teaching perspective, as this is what relates most to us. First of all, it's important to clearly define who is considered as a child. A child is any person under the age of 18 years old. Article 3 of the Child Welfare Act defines child abuse as any adult, including a child's protector, causing harm to the child's health or welfare, or commits physical, mental, or sexual violence, or cruel acts that are likely to impede the child's normal growth, and the child's protector abandons or neglects the child. The first form of child abuse that we will look at is physical abuse. Physical abuse is any non-accidental physical injury to a child. Hitting a child with a body part or a weapon, poisoning them, threatening them, etc. It's also important to note that seemingly innocent objects such as pencil cases, books or rulers can be considered a weapon. Even if just gently tapping a student on the head with an object may seem like a seemingly harmless gesture. However, if any physical, mental or emotional harm is endured by the child, then this is enough to constitute child abuse. Needless to say, all teachers should refrain from striking students with or without objects, no matter how innocent or playful they might mean it to seem. It's very easy for one of these acts to currently fall into the category of child abuse. The next form of child abuse to look at is emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is harming a child's mental and social development or causing severe emotional harm to them. This can be done by rejecting or ignoring students, shaming or humiliating them, terrorizing them, isolating them from their peers or others, corrupting them, etc. Our responsibility as teachers goes beyond that of simple academic mentorship, especially when teaching young learners, and we are also directly responsible for our students' mental and social development during the times that they are with us. Anything done that may hinder a student's mental or emotional development can also be considered child abuse, and it's something to pay very close attention to. Things such as shouting, scolding students, shaming students, humiliating students, or forcing students into isolation away from their peers and others can be considered a form of emotional child abuse and cause great distress to students. We as teachers should never do anything to cause such harm. It is important to stress the employment of positive reinforcement as a way of classroom management and refrain from shouting at students, scolding students, ignoring them, rejecting them, or isolating them away from their peers, their friends, and their fellow teachers. The next form of child abuse is sexual child abuse. Sexual child abuse is using a child for sexual gratification, whether it be via contact or non-contact, making a child view sexual acts, contact abuse, penetration, sexual exploitation, child prostitution, etc. As teachers, we are in the ultimate position of trust with young children and should never do anything to break this level of trust. Any reports of possible sexual abuse against teachers will be investigated to the fullest extent. This includes instances that involve direct contact or non-contact. The next form of child abuse that we're going to look at is that of neglect and abandonment. This can be broken down into four key areas: physical neglect, educational neglect, medical neglect, and abandonment. Physical neglect is the inadequate supervision to be safe, failing to provide enough healthy food and drink, failing to provide clothes that are appropriate to the weather and season. It could also include failure to provide a safe learning environment and ignoring students in obvious physical danger. Educational neglect is allowing a child to miss too much school, not enrolling a child in school. Whilst this mainly focuses on parental neglect, This can also relate to teachers too. Consistently allowing students to not pay attention, forbidding students from participating in class on a regular basis. This can be considered educational neglect and still fall under the umbrella of child abuse. Medical neglect. Medical neglect is keeping a child from getting needed treatment. Teachers and those in a position of trust with children can also fall foul of medical neglect. If a student hurts themselves in the classroom, whether it be a bump or a bruise, a cut, something that we as teachers may find insignificant, we should always put the child's welfare above all things. So, if you see a child get hurt in the classroom, whether you think it's a big deal or not, we must always provide the students who are hurt with the sufficient medical attention. Finally, abandonment. Abandonment is leaving a child without provision for the child's support. Abandoning children at places such as churches, hospitals, and fire stations. Although one may think that these only apply to a child's parent or guardian, it's also entirely possible for teachers to breach all of these things above. We must always be cognizant of the role that we play in our students' lives, especially the times in which they are in the classroom, and things such as ignoring students in clear danger, failing to provide adequate food at lunchtime, snack time, force-feeding students, denying students medical attention, and abandoning students on field trips could also be considered child abuse. It's important to remember as teachers of young children that although we are not our students' primary caregivers or guardians, we fulfill a similar role during the daytime that they are with us, and thus should provide a similar care and attention. As can be seen here, reports of child abuse in all its forms has seen a dramatic rise in recent years, from 2004 up until 2019. However, this is not to say that child abuse itself is on the rise. It's much more of a reflection of individuals' comfort reporting cases and the relative ease with which reports can be made in the present day as opposed to the past decade. Reports of child abuse is something that SLP Ansan strives to take with the utmost sincerity and ensure that we provide a safe and comfortable environment for our students to succeed. As teachers, we are in a unique position to notice the potential signs of child abuse happening at home or elsewhere. There are two main areas to look for these signs: physical signs and psychological signs. Physical signs of child abuse are the following: any skin defects, burns, fractures, bleeding of the eye, ruptured organs, brain damage, growth failure, physiological changes, and death. The psychological signs are also very evident in victims of child abuse. Psychological signs of child abuse can be things such as low self-esteem, mental health disorders, learning disorders, developmental delay, violent or aggressive behavior, and other behavioral problems. All teachers should be on the lookout and pay special attention if a student begins to exhibit one or more of these signs. Article 10 of the Child Abuse Punishment Act defines those who are mandated to report suspected child abuse. It states, any person who becomes aware of or suspects a crime of child abuse in the course of performing his or her duties, he or she shall immediately report it to a specialized child protection agency or investigative agency. In addition to this, all professionals with regular contact with children are obliged to report any signs of child abuse. As teachers of young learners, this specifically applies to us. All SLP staff are obliged to report any suspected cases of child abuse, whether it be physical, mental, emotional, sexual, or otherwise. Here we can see a list of 25 mandated reporters, where all of those who fall under any of the following professions are legally obliged and mandated to report any cases of child abuse in all of its forms. As you can see, included in this list are childcare staff, infant support centres, kindergarten faculty and instructors, academy and teaching centres. As all SLP Ansan staff fall under these professions, all SLP Ansan staff are obligated and mandated to report any cases of child abuse or suspected child abuse. Recognizing the signs of physical child abuse includes any students with wounds in places that seem unlikely to be accidental or caused by the strike of a hand or weapon, wounds found from tools of corporal punishment, such as belts, spoons, utility cords, etc. Burns that are likely to be linked to child abuse. As teachers, we should pay special attention to any students who show up with any of these signs of physical child abuse. If students exhibit any of the following signs, then SLP Ansan staff are encouraged to inquire as to the cause of the injuries. Any injuries that are unexplained or explained in such a way that does not make sense by the caregiver should be reported as suspected child abuse and investigated as such. Signs of emotional child abuse are harder to detect than physical signs. However, there are a few things that we can still be on the lookout for. Recognizing the signs of emotional child abuse can be found when a student refuses to go home, seems depressed, uses foul language on a regular basis, shaming, criticizing, mocking, etc. These are all forms of emotional abuse. Any student at SLP Ansan who seems distressed by the idea of going home, this student is exhibiting signs of possible emotional abuse, and care should be taken to ensure the child's welfare. The following can be considered signs of possible neglect: clothing that is dirty, clothing in the wrong size, clothing not fit for weather, malnutrition, head lice, bed bugs, bad hygiene, etc. Children who are not taken to the hospital when sick, or children who are not enrolled in school. These are also forms of neglect and things that we should be on the lookout for as teachers of young students. Recognizing signs of sexual abuse can be done by paying attention to the following. Does the child have sexual behavior or sexual knowledge that is advanced for their age or unusual? Does the child show guilty behavior? Are there eating disorders present? Does the child exhibit unusual behavior, not interested in what others like? Do they show a sudden rejection of adults? Do they have sleep disturbance, a fear of bedtime, nightmares? These are all key signs of sexual abuse, and any child who exhibits one or more of these should be given the necessary attention to ensure their safety and welfare. If you suspect a case of child abuse, there are a few things you must do. First, do not consult to prevent contamination of child statements. If you suspect a child is being sexually abused and you question them about it, the stress that it causes may cause the students to misremember, and it may hinder the investigative process down the line. If you suspect a case of sexual child abuse, immediately report to 112. Comfort the child. Let them know that it's not his or her fault and that they have done nothing wrong. Finally, do not change the clothes or wash any clothes to maintain the status of the report. If a child has been sexually abused, the clothes which the child was wearing would be key pieces of evidence, and we should preserve them as best as possible. If you suspect a case of possible child abuse and wish to report it to the relevant authorities, then there are a few things that you can do. If you suspect an incident of child abuse in any form whilst at SLP Ansan, then please inform a manager as soon as possible. When officially reporting child abuse to the authorities, there are a few things that you should do to ensure the process goes as smoothly as possible. First, if possible, take photographs as evidence. This is especially the case in circumstances of physical child abuse. Next, act normally as to reduce the anxiety felt by the child. It's very easy for victims of child abuse to blame themselves and to think that something that they have done has been wrong and that they are to blame. If we show signs of frustration, this may heighten this sense of guilt by the child. Therefore, it's very important to act normally, act calm. In cases of sexual abuse, refrain from washing or changing the child's clothing, as previously mentioned. To prevent the child's statement from being contaminated, refrain from questioning the child about the potential abuse. This is best left to the investigating team. It's important to note that the identity of any persons reporting incidents of child abuse will always remain confidential, and all reporters should actively cooperate with the ongoing investigation. When reporting incidents of child abuse, there are a few things that must be remembered. First, specific information on places where the children can be met. This includes the child's address, home address, school address, location of family members where the child may be. Next, the specific nature and extent of the suspected child abuse and whether or not it is an emergency situation. Specific emergency explanations are needed. They are needed to determine emergency dispatch. Should the police be needed, they would be able to dispatch within 10 minutes of report. Please ensure to include the child's personal information, such as their name, gender, age, and characteristics. Very importantly, report the suspected abuser. If you don't know the details on their name, age, identity, please report as unknown. Finally, request from the reporter, precautions for interviews, requests for personal protection, etc. Child abuse is a very serious issue and one which SLP Ansan takes with a high level of concern. If you suspect any students of being the victim of child abuse, then please make sure that you report it immediately to a manager and seek to take steps towards reporting it to the relevant authorities and investigating teams. All members of staff should take extra care and consideration in their interactions with students, both during class time and outside of class time, to ensure that they are in not breach of the Child Welfare Act and causing any physical, mental, emotional, or sexual harm to the student's welfare. Any reports of incidents of child abuse against SLP Ansan staff will be investigated thoroughly. Thank you for taking the time watching this video on child welfare.